Hello, I'm Katy Cowan, and this is the Creative Boom Podcast. This week, our guest is Michael Freimuth, the co-founder and creative director of Franklin, a respected design studio in New York. So how have you been? Because you were one of those to leave New York during the pandemic and you haven't really gone back.
No, I mean, not literally. I've been back a few times, but not to live. So we left at early pandemic, mostly because we were lucky enough to have a place to go at that time. And we continued to run our design studio, Franklin, remotely during that time. But yes, truly it was, some of us migrated out of the city, but a lot of folks were still there. And it's now, what is it? What are we, 2.5 years later?
Yeah.
Many things are kind of returning to normal, or at least seem like they are. And so we do have our studio still in Brooklyn. People are going there regularly. I try to go in a few times a month, which is much more than I can say I was doing a year ago.
You look very well. It looks like it's doing you proud, this kind of country bumpkin life.
I did about 45 minutes of makeup for this call, Katie.
Same.
So thank you. Thank you.
Do you know what? It's because you're wearing your correct seasonal color palette. Have you had your colors done?
You know what? I've maybe it was the COVID, but I got a little salt and pepper here. If you're talking about my hair, that's one thing. If you're talking about...
You've got a little man bun going on.
I'm so glad you mentioned something about that. It's mostly functional, not really style driven. But yeah, I do. In fact, it is a new innovation of like a week ago. So it still feels not stupid to me, but feel free to let me know. I have no perspective because
looks good.
So fresh.
We're getting a little kind of dose of your sense of humor here and possibly a hint at the kind of era both of us grew up in. And you grew up in Chicago in the glorious 1980s. What was that like?
I know we've almost touched on this before. I have taken to describing it sort of like a John Hughes style. Not quite, because I think, as I've mentioned before, I'm not actually that old. That would make me like 50 something, I think, if I was actually like Ferris Bueller's age or something.
Yeah.
But it was the same backdrop. So the North Shore of Chicago, and it felt very much like that. So yeah, I still feel a lot of kind of warm nostalgia to 80s and 90s, which is probably very normal, but it's still comforting. Like, ridiculous old movies are still just as comforting as they always have been.
Yeah, I think this is what I consider all the time. I'm like, is this just a natural thing that every generation is nostalgic about the era they grew up? Or do we have a particular, special slant in that we were kind of the last generation to know what it was like before smartphones and the internet and all the things that have come with it, good and bad?
I agree. I kind of, maybe it's just because it's what I've got, but I've felt very lucky with where I like plugged in to being alive.
So you lived in the next street along from where they filmed Home Alone, right?
Close. I was literally down the block from the Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, like the end scene, John Candy, Steve Martin walking towards this Steve Martin's house.
Yeah.
I could see that house from my house. Home
Amazing.
Alone was like one town over, but you could get there in minutes. And then all the high schools that were, whether it was Breakfast Club or Ferris Bueller's, it was, if not literally our high school, and in some cases it was, like the high school where Ferris Bueller picks up his girlfriend. When he picks her up and pretends to be the dad, that is also the high school that I went to. So,
do you know, though, the star of that film was Eddie McClurg, who played Grace, who had the sort of pencil in her hair, and she was
Grace.
She was like, "Listen, young man." She was brilliant, unsung hero.
Yeah.
I love that film. And you're still in touch with your buddies from back then, and my goodness, you're going to do a short film together inspired by John Hughes movies. Is that right?
Well, you know what? Now that you've said it out loud, I guess people are going to know. Let's just say we're in the early stages of that. I'll give you I don't want to give too much away because it doesn't really exist yet. So I can't give too much away.
Okay.
But we had a very interesting Boy Scout experience, not in a weird way. As kids, we actually had a really kind of like a special group of young people and then like a much older generation, like World War II veterans who kind of helped organize the Boy Scouts in our area.
Oh.
There's just too many ridiculous stories that I feel like could be really interesting vignettes. And I'm playing it safe by doing something very short. So we're beginning to write the screenplay. We're beginning to talk to some folks who could help us make it real, but very early days.
How about you be the kind of, is it Boy Scout leaders, and then the actors that you bring in to play you, they play the kids, obviously.
I like it.
Yeah.
Do the intergenerational. Yeah, we could. That is a great idea. And you don't have to be offended because I think we're going to do that.
Okay. I love it. Can I be in the credits, please?
Totally. What do you want? Just tell me you're in.
Can I just make up a job title?
Yeah, I would.
Something like One Idea Activator.
Sounds good. You could maybe be the first name that comes up.
Is there any kind of like evil characters, or is it just pure nostalgia, pure goodness? Like with a.
I love that you're asking questions like I have any idea what this is yet, but these are all great questions. I think there should be something. I don't know if it's sinister.
Yeah.
Or just, how dark we want to go. It could.
Oh my goodness.
It could. Okay. I'm probably spending too much time on this, but I was thinking each character almost has a vignette about them. So it's almost, maybe I'm cheating. There's not a huge narrative arc here, but it's like a character-driven vignette that's kind of definitional for that person. And it's each around, it's jumping off from some ridiculous thing that we did. Whether that's not that. It's not ridiculous. It's not like there were like drugs or guns with like 12-year-olds, but there was shenanigans.
Really?
You have that word over there? Shenanigans.
Shenanigans. It's a great word.
Yeah. I think it's that. But then maybe every now and then it'll tip just a little too far. Maybe there will be a gun.
So I didn't know that Hughes grew up with 3 sisters and that he lived in Northbrook. Does Northbrook sound familiar to you?
It does. That was close to where I grew up. I love that you actually look at this research you did. These are things I don't know.
I know.
But I probably should.
I could be your researcher.
Yeah, that was nearby. That was right up the road.
Where did you go again? Was it Rhode Island?
It's a convoluted path I went on, but I'll make it brief. I went to Washington University, which was in St. Louis, which was in the Midwest. And then I transferred to Rhode Island School of Design on the East Coast.
Beautiful.
In Providence.
You realized that change is good and went and did something that was more suited.
It was way more arbitrary than that. Basically, I went with a girl I was dating to RISD, whose sister went to school there, and we broke up on the airplane. It was a weird weekend, but
dramatic.
Yeah, but because of that, I kind of got to explore the town and the school all by myself one weekend. And I kind of had never been truly to the East Coast, and I sort of fell in love with Providence. And then I had just discovered a visual communications class at my then current college and was kind of smitten with it. So it was sort of this perfect, mix of finding something I thought I really, really enjoyed, and then having this opportunity to visit this place that seemed to be doing it at a different level. And I applied, and it was the only art school I applied to, and I transferred, and I went.
Because you've kind of done 2 steps, haven't you? You've moved out of New York, and then you kind of ended up in am I going to say this wrong? The Catskills? Well,
so yeah, I wish this was like a easier, smoother explanation, but yeah, we moved north of New York, in New York's state, like 2 hours north of the city for most of the pandemic. And then a lot has happened in the last year. I got married.
Yes.
We had a baby. Also got a puppy. Just while we're doing all the things you can do during a pandemic, we got a puppy who's now locked in a far side of the house because he was being a little asshole.
Yes. And you have to pick up the poo.
Well, you do. Unless you leave it long enough and you then mow over it with the mower. I've found it's almost better that way.
It goes everywhere.
Yeah, it's great. It's like fertilizer. And
I can hear David now.
Oh, God. I'm sorry.
No, don't worry. It's cute.
It's
Oh,
cute.
yeah.
Perfect for a
It's
podcast.
well. I was gonna say like I'll come on to my next question in a minute when you tell me about what where you went next because you're now in Connecticut, but that's kind of like where your parents are. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Oh,
So when we knew we were having David, we began to look to be closer to them. My folks
yeah.
are a little bit older, and we just wanted to spend as much time as we can with them. So yeah, I don't think we would have moved unless that were the case, and it really felt like we could also get closer to the city. So we now have also moved back much further south, closer to the city, so I can get in regularly. I used to tell myself this story, which I think was true then, that I loved coming out of the city to kind of rejuvenate a bit and relax, and then I like going into the city to work and be there during the week. And it slowly began to flip, and I think it's still true, but I love being city accessible, but then having, I don't know, a lot more green space nearby. So I've been wondering if it would do anything to my work or practice or process, or just the, not being in there. And it's, in some ways it gives me more headspace, like space to just be thinking rather than just doing. But I still definitely miss just the energy of being down there, especially amongst the team, which is now remote, but people can come in regularly to the office. But I definitely miss a lot of that kind of collaborative spirit, without going deep into what the future of work for design studios is. I think it's in flux, but it's mostly working for us. So it's working reasonably well.
Yeah.
Unless you want to go into that.
No, I was going to ask, because collaboration is like a big part of what you do and what you're very proud of. How have you kind of been able to sort of still collaborate and make that happen with everything sort of changed now and everything being so remote, in not just in personal circumstances? I guess it's changed in many ways because of the pandemic for a lot of people.
When the pandemic kind of began and we were out of the city and everything truly kind of switched to kind of Slack and email and messaging, there was a tremendous amount of frustration, but it also pretty quickly opened up the fact that everyone could be a lot more autonomous, maybe even than we gave them credit for. I think there was something to myself and my partner when we were in the city where like we were there, so we were available. And since we're so used to just, whether it was like providing direction or feedback, I hope we didn't, we weren't the micromanagers I fear we were, but I think inevitably, distributing like disallows a lot of that. And it was, so on the flip side, it's good for us. It was, I think, an empowering, circumstance for the entire design team, I hope. Mm-hmm. And I think as we've dealt with this over the last few years, we've tried to come back to figuring out like what are those moments of collaboration that are, worth doing in person, or that truly do require more than just like a Slack note, which of course is when so much of our work, maybe it is digital, but there's still, physical work, production work, feedback to be given, sketches to be made. These things still, I think we still struggle a little bit to get to those moments, especially in, I would say, kind of in teaching and mentor kind of capacity. I'm not sure if we've solved this yet, which is, I feel like one of the benefits, especially for folks coming out of school that might have joined Franklin, was kind of being on site and learning, by kind of a little bit osmosis, but also just directly with more senior creative staff. I can sit there and work with someone on something very directly in a way that just hasn't quite been possible. We're lucky that a number of our staff, were with us before the pandemic, so we'd all worked together. I think we had kind of a language and a process and a way of working, and it wasn't that difficult to transition. But for folks that are new to us, or that have been literally, maybe we are now, some we've literally never met in person, as we begin to hire kind of internationally as well. And that's, again, a challenge that I think is just in progress, is how do we translate the knowledge? How do we share some of the culture?
Yeah, and that is a challenge. Yeah, because the culture, I imagine, at Franklin is like, with this kind of lovely warm tone over it, there's some, we're going back to John Hughes. Yeah, I totally can imagine it. I feel like you kind of probably have a culture there where everybody feels very much part of a family, and that there's a case of not taking yourselves too seriously. I mean, that comes across in your personal branding. That humor and warmth comes through. Does that translate to the rest of the team and the studio that you've built? Have you really kind of purposefully created a culture?
That's a good question. I think at the beginning of Franklin, honestly, some of it was intentional, and then some of it was more like a reaction to what my partner and I had experienced in the past. So we both kind of worked at pretty ridiculously time-consuming, like maybe not life-sucking, but maybe life-sucking jobs in our 20s, and realized that was not for us, and we didn't want to give that to anyone else. So we really have always, at the core of Franklin, tried to create a really healthy balance of work and not work. So essentially, as much as you might have a really sexy project or potential client, if they're a nightmare, we're in this privileged position to say like no to that. And I think we are very protective of the design team and their time and our process so that it doesn't spill over. And I like to think we're like the antithesis of what these other places were that I used to work at, which were just tremendous amounts of time, zero really boundaries between work and the rest of your life. And
sounds fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, it feels pretty intuitive now that's like not helpful in a lot of ways. Like, yes, you can get a ton of work done and probably make a bunch of money if you like burn through your junior design staff, but they won't stick around. It feels like much more beneficial long-term to actually give people that space and freedom to just have their lives and realize that like work does not remotely have to be their life. It can be a part of it. It can be as big of a part of it as they'd like it to be. We have this play that we call it, which is everyone is intended to spend essentially half a day a week with flexibility around projects to kind of explore, research, and genuinely play without a tremendous amount of like structured output. Like, don't really care what comes out of it as long as it's in the creative space.
Yeah.
And that was something I wanted to do for a long time. It felt like kind of a little of a pipe dream in my earlier career that someone would just give you time to make a mess, or essentially like try to do something and completely fail.
It kind of opens up more possibility than just sort of working people to the bone. And you kind of demonstrate some of that play on your personal website with all the kind of illustrations and little projects that you've kind of done over the years. Often with a political stance, but never too serious. I feel like that reflects your personality in that, yes, you are very much in touch with the world and all these very sort of serious things that are going on, but you always sort of take that kind of lighter touch. Not that you're not taking them serious. You know what I'm trying to say? Yeah.
Well, I mean, no, thank you for calling it out. It's true. It's something I actually did earlier in my career. I used to try to do more editorial illustration, and I did have a kind of a political bent to my work when I first came out of school, especially. I feel like over time, it's become really important to me again to kind of be an image maker. And I think the illustrations and the editorial stuff that I've been doing lately it feels really good. And typically that's, that means something is happening that's going in the right direction. It is, yeah, also the humor aspect of it. I think a lot of it was kind of manifesting with Trump, to be honest, over that administration. And it didn't feel like there were certainly things you could do out in the world, but one thing that I knew I could do regularly was at least poke at that Trump brand, as there was an interesting book by Naomi Klein. It was called No Is Not Enough. And it was almost a directive within there that using humor as a political tool is something that can be incredibly powerful. It doesn't mean it has to take it all down in one swipe, of course, but it's like you can poke at things and you can disrupt things, even in small ways, but helpful ways. And so I think when I was doing a lot of this kind of Trump poking, that was me getting back to some of these things that I used to do and having a lot of fun doing it, because I think they were silly, but they were serious. Like there was serious content behind it, but the execution was ridiculous, you know, and I think that was actually the point.
A lot of the time, a lot of people are turned off by anything that's too political, too heavy. And just in this era that we're in now, I feel like even more people are like kind of exhausted by politics and all these kind of things that are going on. So you kind of approach it in a very smart way that actually gets you thinking, but also that dash of humor just kind of sort of takes the edge off that kind of seriousness, you know, when we're all trying to just live in a John Hughes film and pretend, no, the world's fine, it's not going to blow up type thing.
There's a pretty earnest streak in me, probably. And I think part of it is without getting too deep into this, I have been thinking about what my now son, who's 6 months old, will think of his dad in the future, and wondering what I did. And I'm really happy to be building some things that I feel quite proud about. Like I'm equally happy to be building commercial work for clients. I got stuck with Franklin and the branding work that I do, but I also get a lot of satisfaction from making these other messages and putting them out into the world, and that maybe has an even longer term effect, even if it's in some cases smaller. So I think I've been really contemplating that also in the context of Franklin, and hoping we can also shift into more clients that are, you know, in those spaces, whether they're cultural or political. Because I think you said this earlier, people are kind of tired of it. I mean, it's exhausting. It truly is. But at the same time, I think that's the alternative is, you know, apathy doesn't help us at all. And so if you just let it be overwhelming, you're like, I'm just done, I'm gonna go watch my John Hughes movie, that actually doesn't help. And I think the reality is that this is always how it's been. Like, everything towards progress and more equality has been a struggle, and it probably constantly felt awful. Maybe it feels particularly awful in this, like, you know, social media saturated environment. You just can't get away from it. Whereas like back in the day, you didn't have to look. You could maybe avoid being bombarded with it, but you don't have to engage in it. That's certainly true. But the way that the change happens is that you actually never stop. Mm-hmm. And that's overwhelming and exhausting. And even the premise of that sounds exhausting to probably a lot of people.
It's kind of it can be the smallest of things, can't it? And what you end up teaching David, and the legacy you want to leave. You know, this is what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, I guess it is. I didn't realize that might be important to me, and I think I'm still kind of working through it. You know, how much, I mean, like a brand new parent, we don't really know what we're doing, but we're trying to understand, like, yeah, what values we want to share, I suppose, to make it sound like overly formal. But, you know, like what we do, I think is what he will see. It's what others see. I do feel lucky that I actually have an avenue for this. I'm sure a lot of people just don't, you know, like I get to literally make political artwork, right? And I can sometimes get paid for it. So that's an avenue.
I mean, how are you finding the balance with fatherhood? And because it's, you know, genuinely not a question I hear a lot. You know, we talk a lot about motherhood and maternity leave and all the rest of it, but what's it like for you, who genuinely wants to spend more time being a dad? And how are you?
You're asking like
it?
the question. This has been. Let's see. How do I answer this? So, I'm lucky because my wife did have a really healthy maternity leave, and she's actually going back to work next Thursday.
Oh, how exciting!
And I am switching, and then I will be taking care of David for kind of a belated paternity leave. So for the next 2 months. So I'm actually looking forward to that tremendously. I'm going to really put Franklin and personal work on hold until the end of the year and take care of David. So that is one very direct balance. I'm like, you know what? Fuck work for a couple months. I'm going to hang out with David. But, you know, I have been at work the last few months, and it's difficult.
Yeah, I bet.
It's really difficult because he's such a smiley, lovely little child, and I want to like Ashley will like make it look like he's levitating into the room from like right over there. And I'm like, oh, I can't work. I'm not going to work right now. I got to go over there. I am trying my best to stay engaged at Franklin, but also do a little bit of this more personal work that I've been mentioning. And then it's an imperfect balance, and it really varies day to day.
Put him on your lap and teach him to type, and just get him working with you.
Thought he could be more of an intern. I thought he'd be more productive, honestly.
Yes.
I'd like a developmental milestone that includes typing.
6 months old, I mean, really, what were any of us doing back then? Gurgling,
regurgitating milk, pooping a lot. Well, pooping every couple days.
Are we out of the black phase? The black poo phase? I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we've moved into the mustard phase.
Oh, mustard. Nice. And is it really kind of potent? Do you
it can
argue
be,
over
especially if it kind of builds up for a couple of days. Like for a little while, we're like, okay, he hasn't pooped in 4 days. We call the pediatrician. They're like, it can go 2 weeks. And we're like, are you sure? Like, what's happening? And they're like, well, he's using the stuff he's eating to grow bigger. So he's not pooping. And I'm like, great. Good to know. And so then a week in, it was like a normal morning. Everything seemed nice. And then something began to smell from the corner. And I was like, oh my God. It's like someone, maybe I'm glad this is a podcast. People can imagine this. But that's a thing he does. We haven't talked about you at all. I haven't heard anything that's going on.
This isn't about me. This is
about
you and my guests.
I feel like I should have had a little more context. Like, what's been going on since we talked last?
Oh, I've just been working. I've been doing Creative Boom full time since early 2021, working with some incredible brands, which hopefully people don't realize because I try and keep advertising off of my platform as much as possible. But yeah, I've been working. I've done some stuff with Microsoft. I've been working with Adobe and Wix.
I get your newsletters that are fantastic.
Yes, thank you very much. That's going through a bit of a redesign at the moment. 35,000 subscribers now or something like that. So that's nice. With an open rate of 40%, my love.
Holy crap.
That is
so humble. That's ridiculous.
Amazing. I know. It's because we're awesome. What can I say?
I'm glad you own it like that. That's good. That's fantastic. So things are good.
Things are
going
great.
well.
I'm great. Tom's great. That confidence fail I had a few years ago, completely over. I'm now completely full of anxiety. No, I'm joking. Roll out a John Hughes film, sorts me out. I'm okay. So, let's just go back before we sort of wrap this up. I mean, we've talked about collaboration. We've talked about your childhood and the amazing film. I can't wait to see it at Sundance. I guess with everything in mind and, everything we talked about, would you consider yourself an optimist?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Because when were you born? Let's work this out.
1980. Turns
1980.
1980, a classically nice round number. I didn't realize that truly I'm termed a zennial.
Yes, same.
Yes, that's the little window
Tiny.
Of zennialness. And I was sort of sad to be bumped out of the elder millennial category, but it's fair because I'm not on that edge. And it's I like that space. Late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, I'm a 1978 child, so I'm in that kind of tiny window as well. And we're described as hardworking, optimistic, entrepreneurial, by no means lazy.
Well, we got lucky that, kind of skated through a bunch of stuff, you know?
Yeah. You know how everybody hates the baby boomer generation now because they think they had it really easy.
Yes.
And whether that's true or not, I'm not going to say.
Fair.
But do you think we'll be the new hated generation?
The new hated?
Yeah. The zennials. Ugh, those zennials. They
Possibly.
never realized how good they had it. Ugh.
But we do realize. I feel lucky every day. I'm definitely an optimist. I'm very hopeful. I'm very optimistic. And I want to also give that to my son and have that be part of our family, I hope. So yeah, I want to try to cultivate that and make that be how I think that's one of the wonderful things about my wife is she is also just inherently like a positive person. And I think that's been really wonderful in a partner, and then also for having a small family. We try to keep it positive even with when things completely fall apart, which they do and they have and they will. And so, yeah, I'm going to try to stay on the side of positivity, optimism.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for chatting with us. I'm really honoured that you found some time, given everything you've got going on at the moment. And I hope you really enjoy your time with little David.
Thank you, Katie. I really enjoyed this as well. Thanks so much.
If you want to learn more about Michael Freimuth, you can find everything you need via our show notes at creativeboom.com/podcast.